Hi, and welcome to Best in Tesla. So, China has been setting themselves up for world dominance in the automotive world for more than a decade. And as we see live right now, the legacy automakers are dying in China and have set themselves up for a failure in the US as well by betting on the wrong type of car, as Jim Farley has explained. And the Chinese are getting ready to release the tsunami upon the world. And the legacy automakers are defenseless against this tsunami, while Tesla seems to be riding the wave. So let's check it all out and let's dive right in. So we often compare the Chinese innovation and the upcoming with electric cars with the Japanese innovation and invasion of most of the world with their small affordable cars back in the 70s. But I do believe we will see the same thing happen again with the Chinese EVs takeover. But there is a huge difference between the Japanese upcoming in the 70s and the Chinese upcoming now. That is that Japan spread to every corner of the world their more affordable cars, but Japan itself is only about 4 to 5% of the car market. So what China is going to be able to do with an order of magnitude bigger market than Japan. China is not just like 4 to 5% of the automotive market, they are 30% of the entire global market just inside of China and have now built out a capacity to produce about 65% of the world's demand for cars. There are about 90 million cars sold every year, and China has a capacity for about 58 million. And their market is only about 30 million, so they have a capacity to export about 18 million cars with the factories they have today. And remember, last year they were the biggest exporter of cars of any country on the planet, and that was only 6 million cars. China has a capacity already to export 3 times as much as that. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear what Ford CEO Jim Farley had to say himself.
And Japan is between 4 and 5 million. So that's not even 5% of the global.
Yeah.
You add Korea in there, it's even smaller market. China is 1/3. It's 30 million vehicles. It's twice the size of Europe and the UK combined.
Wow.
And they have 58 million units of capacity built out already. So
wow.
They can export 28 or 29 million vehicles. And that is larger than Europe, all the UK, and most of Mexico, part of the US, and all the companies wouldn't have to build one vehicle. And they don't have to build any more factories. That's the factories they have today.
So this is also why someone like Ford has made their skunk team, that is, starting from scratch, because Jim Farley knew he would never be able to change Ford culture and make this work in-house. As I have talked about many times before, the hardest thing to change in a company is its culture. And Jim is also recognizing that the Germans have failed on this, as they have tried to make it in-house, but have all failed and are now making joint ventures with the Chinese car companies to make this work. Let's just hear Jim explain this as well.
And we did look the other way. And why is that the case? Well, I worked at Toyota for 25 years. When I joined Toyota in the US, there was 500 people at the company.
Wow.
And we were like a marginal brand. No one even knew of us, as you said, outside of Kick. I worked there for 20 years.
Right.
My family was not happy. They wouldn't talk to me here in Detroit because they were ashamed that I worked there. And there was a huge social cost in the Midwest of the U.S. for the success of Toyota. So many jobs were lost, including many people in my family. And, you know, I can't unlearn that as a young man. I can't unlearn the fact that the Detroit 3 really never had a plan.
Yeah.
And we're not going to miss this one. Bill Ford and I shook hands or embraced whatever metaphor you want to use. And we said, this one, we're going to have to get it right from scratch. Yeah. And that's why we created the Skunk Works team in California, because I felt like the institution of Ford would have a really tough time competing with BYD. So we needed a ground-up team with a similar approach as Kelly Johnson's SR71, Skunk Works in California. My badge doesn't even work there. I can't even get in the building.
Wow!
And that,
Seriously?
wow. Oh yeah, no, and that's how extreme of a approach, a different approach we needed to compete against BYD, because the traditional industrial company, look at, VW with MEB and so many other companies in the West that tried to compete in China and now are just adopting Chinese platforms because they couldn't do it. We all saw that coming, and so we said we got to take a different approach.
So, even though Jim is saying the Germans have failed, we have to recognize that so has Ford and GM. Sure, Ford is still working on their new EV platform with their Skunk team, but their current EVs, they have also failed in China, just like the Germans have. We see that the Mustang Mach-E in China in January has sold 11 units. Sure, that is 2 better than Volkswagen's ID.7 that sold 9, but this still is a big failure from Ford as well. So they are also being kicked out of China, just like we have seen with GM closing its first factory in China, as their revenue since 2018 has dropped almost 70%. Now that is a company we are seeing dying in real time. So even though Jim Farley makes it sound like Ford is doing much better than Volkswagen and the other Germans, they are all getting their asses kicked in China. And you might say, but Lars, I hear all the time that Tesla is the one that is doomed in China because of all the fierce competition. Yes, but as you can see, the facts shows us that it is the legacy automakers that are doomed in China, as Ford will not have an EV platform from their Skunk team ready in time, and GM is dying as we speak, and the Germans are losing big time in China as well. The Volkswagen Group has lost over 1 million unit sales over the last 7 years in China. And Tesla, well, in January, with the new refreshed Model Y coming, but only the old version available for sale, the Tesla Model Y still became the second best-selling SUV of any powertrain in China in January, and sold over 25,000 units. And Ford sold 11 Mach-Es. Even the numbers that I left out from Tesla's sales by saying over 25,000, well, they actually sold 25,694. Just that 694 I left out is about 63 times more sales than Ford sold of the Mach-E in January. The Mach-E is less than a rounding error on Tesla sales. Comparing it directly to Tesla's sales of the old version of the Model Y, well, it actually sold 2,335 times more units than the Mach-E in January in China. So we only see articles about Tesla in trouble in China because of the competition, but never really hear about Ford that is in trouble in China, even though Tesla sells 2,335 times more units than their direct competitor. We can really see how twisted mainstream media's reporting is. Frankly, embarrassing. But anyway, Jim Farley has explained that Ford will not be able to ever become profitable on their current platform, as they thought before COVID that they could charge about 30 to 40% more on their EVs than they are able to do.
What happened is we made that judgment to invest right before COVID. And when COVID happened, no one could build vehicles because of the semiconductor shortage, except for Tesla. Because they had built an electrical architecture that allowed them to be relatively independent of silicon supply. All the rest of us had 1,500 chips in our cars. They were from all over the globe, and we were 20 or 30% short. So we couldn't make anything, and people couldn't buy anything. So there were no stock. The prices shot up, and we thought that is how life would be forever. What turned out to happen is as soon as we all got chips, and we started to produce in EVs, like us scaling, some of the manufacturers in Europe scaling, like VW, we found out that the mainstream customers were completely different to the ones that bought during COVID, and they were not willing to pay any premium for an electric car. And that was a total game changer, because when we invested, we have a 4-year life cycle, the year or two before COVID, and then, of course, felt really comfortable with the prices during COVID. That 4-year period of ignorance, let's call it that, meant that we over-contented our vehicles, made the batteries too big, didn't experiment with battery chemistry, didn't experiment with advanced engineering or manufacturing, and the Chinese were, by the way. And so we found ourselves like upside down by $20,000 or $30,000 in terms of what the customer was willing to pay versus what it cost. So what happened after that, and it depends on every company, and I can certainly explain the fourth thing, is that we got real. We were like, okay, now we have to design a vehicle that's basically the same cost as a combustion hybrid vehicle in our case, and we cannot use a traditional approach like our Gen 1 products. So the Gen 2 products we've been working on for about 2 years, radical left turn in terms of our approach of engineering them and which segments will compete.
He can blame it all he wants on COVID, but I personally think the biggest factor was Tesla setting the benchmark of what a very good and capable EV should cost. So when Tesla sells the Model Y, a compact SUV, for about $50,000, Ford could of course not sell the Mark E for $75,000, or they would sell absolutely 0 units of that car. But Jim admits that Ford will never be profitable on their current platform, and that is why they are waiting for their new platform to come and save them and make them competitive again. Just like Toyota has also admitted, short after they came out with their first real BEV, the BZ4X, they said they would never become profitable on the current platform, and that was why they had to make a whole new EV platform straight away, and they now have copied everything they can from Tesla with gigacasting, structural battery pack and so on. But they will not come out with an EV on that platform before 2027. So neither Ford, Toyota or Volkswagen for that matter will not have anything that will be truly competitive, especially on price, for another couple of years. And a couple of years is a lifetime in China. BYD can develop a whole new car in just 1.5 years. So they can come out with a completely new model before Ford or anyone else really have a new model out that can actually compete with what is on the market today. They work too slow, so they will always be behind the Chinese and Tesla, as their development cycle is twice as fast as the legacy automakers. So it is going to be impossible to ever get in front, because they are already behind and are moving at half the speed. But at the same time, Ford and GM have been setting themselves up for failure in the US with EVs as well. Because, as Jim has also explained, the bigger the car, the more profits there are on the car when it is an ICE car. And that is why we have seen Ford and GM get rid of basically all small cars in the US and have only trucks and big SUVs left. But as he said, the opposite is true with EVs. The bigger the car, the less money you make on it, as you need a bigger battery, like with GM that puts in a 200 kilowatt-hour battery in the huge EV trucks. So in the US, Ford and GM's business model is set up for huge SUVs and pickup trucks, which is the most expensive model to produce as an EV. Elon Musk actually commented on this once, as he wrote on X back 3 years ago when asked about the pricing of the Cybertruck. Our primary challenge is affordability. Creating an expensive truck is relatively easy. So what GM has done with the Hummer EV, right? If it is extremely hard to do for Tesla, despite our much greater economy of scale and better technology, then it is damn near impossible for others. Yep, and that is basically the only kind of vehicle Ford and GM and Stellantis basically have left. Huge, big cars, making the transition to EVs even that more difficult for them. So while they are getting their ass kicked in China by the Chinese, they have set themselves up for failure in the US, with Tesla as a direct competitor setting the prices. That is already making money on EVs, as they have also integrated as much as possible to be in control of their own destiny. Like Jim also said, if there is a problem on the bridge between the US and Canada, their production line stops in Detroit within an hour. Well, let's just hear Jim explain it.
If there's a problem on the Ambassador Bridge here in Detroit between Canada and Detroit, within an hour, we run out of seats for the F-150. Because the seat manufacturer across the bridge in Canada is making their seats about 45 minutes in front of the vehicle. Wow. That's how tight to get that efficiency,
So the legacy automakers have outsourced everything, so making innovations themselves is very difficult. They bet on the wrong type of vehicles when taking profits over volume in the ICE market. They bet on the wrong kind of battery technology with lithium-ion batteries and can't pivot fast enough to just start using LFP batteries. They don't have the software know-how in-house, so their current EVs are just not competitive on the Chinese market, as we can clearly see with the sales numbers. So if you think the invasion of the Japanese in the 70s was huge with their small affordable vehicles, well, the tsunami that is coming from China is going to be an order of magnitude bigger, as they have been betting on EVs and battery technologies for 10 to 15 years, and had Tesla come to China to make EVs cool, and has been building up capacity to take over the world in the EVs, while they have almost the whole supply chain within China, and is now making so good EVs that Ford CEO is testing them out and saying he doesn't want to give them up.
It's like everyone's talking about the Apple car, but the Xiaomi car,
which now exists and is on the road.
Which now exists.
Tens of thousands.
And it's fantastic. They sell 10,000, 20,000 a month. They're sold out for 6 months.
Wow.
That is an industry juggernaut and a consumer brand that is much stronger than car companies. I don't like talking about the competition so much, but I drive the Xiaomi. We flew one from Shanghai to Chicago, and I've been driving it for 6 months now, and I don't want to give it up.
Right. Wow. That's an extraordinary thing to say, isn't it?
So the big problem for someone like Ford and Toyota and all the other guys is that their culture is not set up to move fast and innovate. That is why Ford has made their skunk team. And Jim Farley doesn't even have access to that factory because he knows he would never be able to shift Ford, the 100-year-old company, in time, as he would never be able to change its culture. Just like we have seen with Joe Justice, that is helping Toyota setting up their daughter company with the upcoming CEO of Toyota and try to teach them how to be agile. But Toyota will not have this implemented in Toyota in time. We are not even talking this decade. So the biggest problem for legacy automakers is self-inflicted, first of all, that they didn't take EVs seriously enough and therefore started too late, and is now behind the competition that is also moving faster than they are. So no wonder that the legacy automakers are shaking of fear in their foundation. The Chinese have better EVs than they have, and they know the future is EVs. China has all the technology and supply chain for EVs inside the country, and have been setting it all up during the last 15 years, and have a capacity in factories built out to produce about 65% of the world's car production. They are ready to release the tsunami upon the world. So while the old guys are losing their economy of scale on the ICE car, as we see with Volkswagen and their utility rates on their factories and GM closing a factory in China and so on, China is setting themselves up for world domination. And thank you for watching. And until next time, take care out there and be nice.